So welcome to the Conversation Cafe, which is this week as part of the Discover Multi-Faith Fair. It's a 3-day event that the Concordia Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center is hosting to encourage the community to reflect on what our beliefs are, our values, what drives us, what motivates us, and also learn about each other. And also to really show experience and show that faith and religious diversity in all that entails people, faith, spiritual, philosophical journeys, that's really that diversity is a gift to Concordia and to the world at large. So that's what the fair is about. And today I'm really pleased to welcome our guest. Angie Bellata is from the Inspirit Foundation in Toronto. And I actually didn't know Angie until I contacted the foundation. But we've had great conversations. And the Inspirit Foundation is an interfaith, it's an organization, and I'm going to read it so I don't totally mess it up. Promoting inclusion and pluralism through media arts and support for young content creators and impact investment, and specifically addressing discrimination based on ethnicity, race, and religion. So I'm really glad I think that's a great organization to contribute to our fair this week. And I'm really glad to welcome Angie. And before we actually start with the conversation, I just want to say that with the Conversation Cafes, we try to create a space where we can explore topics, where we can do that in a place where we can learn and somewhat challenge each other, but do that in a safe environment. So this is about learning, not about competing or about comparing so much, but more about sort of reflecting with one another. And I also just usually like to give people the opportunity to say their name, how they're connected to Concordia. And today, maybe one thing that excites you about religious diversity, and I really mean one, just say a word. So I'm Ellie, I'm the chaplain at the MFSC. And one thing that excites me is just that I get to experience, one word, experience difference. And I'll pass on the microphone to Sai.
Thank you, Ellie. Hello, everyone. My name is Sai. I am a student. I'm a master's student at Concordia. And one thing, well, I think the fact that there are so many religions, but everything has something in common. So that's what excites me about religious diversity. I'd like to pass it on to Brian.
Hey, I'm Brian. I'm a first-year student studying psychology at Concordia. Something that excites me about religious diversity is acceptance. And I'll pass it on to, I guess, Hirsch, because Angie's going to be talking.
All right. Well, hi, my name's Hirsch. I'm a first-year master's student in mechanical engineering. And I find something that excites me is about religious diversity is, learning about how different people view things and how learning new things about, different other groups.
Great, thanks. And Angie, do you want to introduce yourself in that way too? And then, is that part of what you're doing today anyway?
Sure. Okay, well, let me introduce myself that way. So my name is Angie Bellata, and in terms of like religious diversity and religion in general, I get like super excited by religion in general, because I do like the thought process and the philosophies that have like, developed over the centuries when it comes to religion. But I think also I really like the arts, culture, and production side of like different societies around the world in terms of like their religious attributions, whether it be buildings, monuments, religious sites, these kind of things. I mean, they always fascinate me, quite frankly. So yes, that's me in a nutshell. But Ali, how do you want to do this? Do you want to have a conversation, or
So
how do you feel you want to do this?
So usually what we do is, I was hoping you would do just talk for a bit, like some of your thoughts about religious diversity. Tell us about yourself, your own journey, for like 5 minutes or so, and then people can ask questions, and then that leads into conversation. But start us off with a few reflections on maybe where you're coming from, and maybe continue on that path of what excites you about it. Maybe that's a starting point.
Okay. If I talk too long, please let me know, because I can talk. Okay, so just as a bit of background for everyone here, I am Muslim, and I was born into a Muslim family. And Islam is like one of those very interesting religions in the sense that, I mean, if you're born into it, it just becomes part of you. So I guess in a way didn't have to do a lot of like religious research to arrive at what I believe in today. I just, it was it was an inherited thing that I took on and then just integrated into my life. Like many people, I went through a period of questioning and trying to seek out the point of religion, and then how do you get from a starting point of religion to religious diversity, because I think those are two completely different things. And people always I feel like often people get caught up in the being right about religion, as opposed to like listening to religion. So in university, I kind of took my own path. That probably was because I'm also a poli-sci graduate, and in political science you debate and argue everything, but religious history and the role of religion plays a consequential factor in the shaping of like political history, to the systems that we have today. So it's always there in the background. And during that period, I spent a lot of time, not necessarily, I never got to a point where I questioned my own sense of religion. I think I was always happy with my own sense of religion, because, for me, Islam challenges you constantly. It isn't the kind of religion that you could just take on easily as a name. You constantly have to be challenged, to do better and be better. And that kind of was my starting point. So in university, I spent a lot of time researching and questioning and asking about like how does religion play a role in a life in which, at least for a large part of the Western hemisphere, religion and society are essentially separated. There was a period when I was growing up that, religion was not cool. It wasn't the thing you ever talked about. And there's always that, what do they say? There's always that adage in polite conversation. You In polite conversation, you don't talk politics and you don't talk religion. So that's kind of how I grew up, here in Toronto. And then at 23, I left Toronto and decided to go travel the world. And originally because I was working in human rights, and that, took me to very desperate situations and very desperate locations, in different places, in the world. And that was an interesting introduction to how religion plays a role in different people's lives in other places, particularly the global south, which is very, very different than the global north. And the diversity and the commonality of religion have always struck me as being kind of like the yin and the yang, because even in any given society, even if the majority follows a religion, there is a diversity in practice and in the localities. So whether it be sectarian diversity or cultural diversity, all of that plays major roles in what religion looks like. And then I went through a period of my life where I was also really fascinated by the architecture of religion, how buildings were built centuries ago to celebrate ideas and theologies, but also play a central role in building communities. And I think that's kind of been like the most interesting aspect of religion for me. I could keep on going on and on and on, but maybe I'll take a breath here.
Sure, you've raised so many really interesting points. For me, what stuck out is this notion of religion and culture that are separate, or religion and the rest of life that are, and I think that's particular to North America. And I'm wondering if others have just a comment on that, and also the architecture and architecture as a way to gather and to build community. And I'm also curious how, if you have any reflections on that during COVID. But I would love to know, from others, what do others have, comments, questions, thoughts, because the cafe is about having a conversation, and not so much I mean, it's great to have to listen to you, and so for me it's about saying, oh, so that's where I see it similarly, or this is where it's different for me. So does anybody sort of have a kind of conversation, question, or a point they'd like to jump off on? No. Okay, then let me I'm sort of comparing it to, I know sometimes it takes a while to get the conversation going, and we're a smaller group today too, so that's all good. So I guess I'd love to hear if you, when you traveled, did you sort of have a different sense of how life how life is more integrated in other places, and do you have any thought about the cost of that separation of faith and the rest of life and spirituality in North America, and how have you found any ways to, or have you sought to integrate that anymore? I guess I'd be curious about that, Angie.
I mean, in North America and specifically like the global South, because it does include as well the European countries, there is a very distinct separation. I mean, it arises from the separation of church and state, really, which is like a historical move to limit the powers, particularly of the Catholic Church. And so there is that historical idea that religion should not enter, the public domain, because it does lead to wars, it does lead to, problems among populations. I think that, coming from so my parents, well, also me by extension, were of Egyptian background, and so we also come from a different kind of civilization. So coming with like, I always like to tell people I come from like centuries of being on this planet, just because of where Egyptian civilization was, and religion always played a role, whether it be the pharaonic religions, or eventually Islam when it came to Egypt and to other countries, surrounding countries. It's always been an integral force within our cultures. So there is this push and pull between Western centric ideas that really have arisen from like European histories that have affected North America, and then all the other people who come to North America and come from these long civilizations where, religion is a prominent thing. It is the thing that dictates how people treat each other. It isn't just about a relationship with God. It's also about a relationship with community, with surroundings, with environments. And so for in my experience, and I think, for a lot of people who come from similar backgrounds to me, religion is an organizing force. It's like the unwritten canon of like how societies deal with each other. When there's conflict amongst communities, when there's conflict amongst individuals, you bring in the higher authority of religion to calm down and create, a referential guide to how you should be as a human being. Doesn't mean that people always end up that way, but there's an interesting sense in that. In terms of organizing in community,
Just
I mean, obviously, Mhm. Sorry.
Can we like that to me? Like, I know I raised two questions, but I'd love to dig a bit deeper on that. And again, if somebody else wants to speak up, just unmute yourself, and that's sort of a sign that you'd like to say something. Because I find that's great in countries that the religious authority, like sort of the final sort of, you know, judgment of how shall we treat one another, what is the right path forward. I think that's great in when there's sort of a common understanding in a country like Canada that's religiously more diverse, where clearly still one religion, i.e. Christianity, has sort of has the power and the privilege. Like, I guess I'm wondering how you could see that navigated better, or how you would see how religion could take how a moral compass, how religion could be more of a moral compass in such a diverse country, and also where the religious groups themselves are so diverse. I know certainly for me, many of my fellow Christians would have a very different opinion, or do have a very different opinion than me on certainly social questions. So I'm just wondering how you would see that navigated.
I mean, okay, let me preface this by saying that there is a lot of, there's definitely a lot of debate and question and diversity amongst and within religious communities. So I mean, I'm going to talk about like the example of Islam, because that's the one that I practice. But prefacing that, saying that not all Muslims have the same mind. Just because
Exactly.
just because we have the Muslim label, we are by no means all the same on this. But I would say, I mean, Islam is like for a lot of Muslims who practice, even if they are in the fringes of practicing, Islam is a very strong religion. It's an organizing religion. It is not a religion that leaves you. It follows you everywhere, in the sense that its dictates range from God, community, individual. So on all levels of your life, there's a very strong presence there of like how you should be as a human, what is expected of you. I mean, even things like cleanliness, how many times you need to like clean your hands a day, you know, all these things are like super dictated to the very minute level. But then there are other things, or other organizing principles, like how do you treat your neighbor, what is expected of you in terms of being neighborly, whether the neighbor is Muslim or not. How do you respect a society, how do you engage with a society. And so for a lot of Muslims who you know, who were born or came to North America, you know, the community aspect begins with the mosque. The mosque plays a very, very important role, because once a week you are gathered in a building that you will see other people from your community that likely you would not see at work or at school. And so there's a relationship that builds there. For 1 month of the year, you're all praying, eating, you know, together during Ramadan. There's a lot that goes into that kind of relationship. And so in terms of like going to your question, in terms of like a country like Canada, in which there is a pluralistic society, how do you maintain it? It's there, but I think it also depends on the community. And it isn't, Muslim communities are by no means the exception here. A lot of other communities, Indian communities, you know, different Southeast Asian communities, different African communities practice the same thing, even within their diversity of thought. So when it comes to issues like, for example, like, how do you solve problems when you are a religious community within a greater majority that doesn't necessarily practice the same religion or same ideas? There's an overlap there. And I think this is kind of where the community is balanced out by the general society, the community plus everybody who is outside of that community. So going back to Islam as an example, there are very strict rules for Muslims and how they should behave amongst other people and with other people. And there's also a respect that there are laws in a country that don't necessarily contradict, you know, local religious laws. So for example, if Canada made it mandatory to eat pork, this would be a problem for Muslims, all Muslims,
Right.
you know. But that is not but that's not the situation. Canada, a lot of the rules that govern our societies are the same rules that govern a lot of religious societies. Do not kill, treat your neighbor, kindly. You have a problem, there's an authority that you should seek, these kind of things. So I don't see that there is a contradiction. In fact, I see that there is there's a commonality that allows it to be possible.
Yeah. I'm glad
That
you
makes
say
sense.
that, because yes, it makes total
Yeah.
sense. And I think that's sort of what we're trying to promote and say at the MFSC at Concordia, because I think there is an image out there that that's not so, that there is, that it's incompatible. And to me, that I resonate with what you say. Now, Sai, you had your microphone off there for a minute while I was talking. So are you there?
Yeah. It was. I mean, I unmuted by mistake, but still, I did have, like. I mean, I'm. There are a lot of thoughts going on right now, but I just wanted to first ask this question: that when you said about global South and global North, I didn't really understand that. What does those terms exactly mean? Like.
Oh, well, okay, I will say there's an old naming system that goes first world, second world, third world, and it's about the political and progressive development of countries. Personally, I don't like that naming system. So I like to separate it, the global North, which is like generally the European / North American countries, and then the global South. And the reason why I do this separation is because sometimes in the context of what we in talking about like how communities operate and how they develop, there is a very distinct pattern in the North that is very different from the pattern in the South. And that's honestly the only reason why, just because I haven't found a better naming system. And I'm very much against first world, second world, third world, because that makes it sound like it's a race and somehow the third world lost, even though I think the third world's cool. Greatest by far.
Okay, that clears up a bit.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like Western versus Oriental, probably. Could you say that? Like, the global North is kind of what comes under the Western civilization or the Western idea of religion, versus the Oriental, which is more like the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so like if I were to be really honest and not to get like super I don't want to disagree to that, because I think that there is truth to that. I think I just came a long time ago and realized that I hate, like for me personally, using the idea of the West versus the Orient, because I also grew up in North America, where our history books taught us about how great the West was and completely like eliminated the impact and the contributions of what is called the Orient.
Yeah. Okay.
So for that reason, I feel like the minute you say the West, in people's minds, there's a sense of progressiveness. And the minute you say the Orient, it's almost like kind of backward, but that's because of colonial manipulation of language, which is why I don't use them. But I agree with what you're saying. Like, I also agree on a point with what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. It's interesting. And one point which was striking for me was first of all, in your opening, when you said that it's diversity and commonality, and diversity just doesn't mean like two different religions, but even in a single religion there's so much diversity. And I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense, because there's so many differences that I saw back home in India. But even like in Hinduism, it's just too big and too wide, and too many deities and too many gods, and like how they differ in each aspect of even living, and that was really interesting. And one more thing was, I didn't understand exactly when you said Islam is not a religion which like leaves you anywhere, and it has set rules for everything. But isn't that the case with every religion? Like how do you think it is different in that aspect, or which religion did you kind of like compare it to when Uh, you were talking about that.
Yeah. In the sense that there are, I mean, I think, okay, so I mean, to be fair, I do think that every religion to some extent has these elements in which it comes into your life. I think, and you know what? I wasn't necessarily comparing Islam to anyone else. I was trying to compare the depth of how much Islam is a social religion for those who practice it. So I don't know if that makes sense, because often when we talk about religion, I think there's this sense that, and you know, I could be wrong, but it could come as well from like people's understanding of religion through what they've seen in pop culture. And really, in this sense, we're talking about Christianity. In North America, you see a lot of Christianity in pop culture. And so, you know, when you talk about religion, people have a sense that it's like you do a prayer or you go on a certain day and then that's it, you're done religion for your week, you know. I just wanted to emphasize that Islam is one of those religions that isn't that. In fact, it is all the time. There is not a waking moment where this religion isn't somehow part of your life or part of the way you think, or like the things that you think about, in that sense. So not as a comparison to other religions, more like just how deep it involves itself in every aspect of one's life, whoever's practicing it.
I think that I like how you phrase that. I didn't hear it as a comparison, but when we take religion seriously, whatever it is, or our philosophy, you know, like the fact that you care for the environment and you know, that should go into every decision, from the kind of toilet paper to buy to where you spend your summer vacation, or, you know, but I do think the critique is we talk about, certainly in Christianity, Sunday Christians, you know, sort of the notion that you can go to church 1 hour on Sunday and the rest of the week you can be a jerk, but it's okay because you pray. And that seems very hypocritical. And so I think for practitioners and anyone with a philosophy, a set of values, those values should guide us in all that we do. And that's a challenge. It's not always possible. And, or, you know, but I mean, this morning we had an interesting conversation we did the conversation wheel about food, and how, you know, a lot of the food rules are because whenever you put something in your mouth, you have to remember what it is God requires of you. Or even as a vegan, you have to look at what's in there, because it's incredible what's in stuff. You know, does this piece of whatever chocolate bar have some milk product in it, or and so it's just a way of being intentional in everything we do. So that's sort of what I heard you say. Yeah. And I'm curious too, Angie, if you could tell us a bit more about the Inspirit Foundation and some of your projects there, and in ways in which you particularly engage young people, youth and young adults in those questions of diversity, and it's not just about religion, but also culture and art, I believe.
Right. So Inspirit Foundation is a small funder, just, you know, as a background for everyone. It's a small funder based in Toronto, but we fund projects all over Canada. And the idea is we believe that we can make Canada a more pluralistic and equitable society by funding arts and media organizations or individuals who work on those, you know, on those themes, on those topics. And we also believe in impact investing as like the financial side of our work. And the idea of impact investing is that, you know, essentially put your money where your mouth is. Like if you're going to support pluralism and equity, it means financially you also need to support it in how you invest the money that are within the foundation, but also how we support other projects to also invest their money wisely in companies and in projects that are better for humanity in general, that are good for the environment and good for humanity. We work specifically on the themes of Islamophobia and Indigenous reconciliation. And I mean, I'm not completely sure what the history there is because I just recently joined this year. But I think the board of the fund decided that after like a lot of study, decided that these were two pressing issues in Canadian society affecting very specific minorities. But you know, our work is founded on the idea that we support these communities and these basically like different minority groups to promote a better society, because we believe in supporting their narrative power, or rather a shift in narrative power, giving the voice back and giving the voice and the platforms back to people who should have those platforms, because that's how pluralism happens in a society. So that's like that's a bit of like just a bit of background of my work. We're all, I would say, in terms of like colleagues, I think we all come from varying religious and religiosity backgrounds. Not all of us practice religion the same way or approach religion the same way, but there are definitely elements, a lot of elements in which religion plays a role, particularly when we work with groups who are also religious minorities. That's kind of like the intersections of where our work is. I don't know if you Ellie, if you asked this one, but on an individual level, if you want me to answer that, I kind of, you know, I'm a big believer in, you know, religion has a very strong capacity to destroy societies and to also change societies. And I think that, you know, you can go one way or the other. A very good example of its destructive forces is the late Trump. I'm sure he's still alive, but, you know, whatever, him. You know, I mean, you know, but also historically in Canada, religion has been a very destructive force, particularly in terms of its colonial use, in terms of minorities. But I do think that also religion has a very positive use and can build societies when given the freedom to grow in a pluralistic environment. And I think that informs a lot of people's backgrounds, particularly people who are religiously minded. Not everyone comes to religion as a practice, so I want to be mindful of that. But those who do and who are in this kind of field that I'm in tend to come from the idea that, listen, we've seen what religion can do in terms of its positivity in our own lives and in many cultures around the world. And so we like to harness that power for positive change.
So often when I tell people where I work as a chaplain at Concordia, they go like, oh, that must be so difficult. I don't know how you do it. How do you work with all those groups? There's Muslim and Jewish, and it's like, it's great. I love it. And it's just, there's this stereotype. It saddens me really, because I think not a lot of people actually have experience in interfaith, just, you know, actually talking. They might have friends who are whatever, but to actually sit down and talk about what makes us tick, what our sort of our moral compass comes from, what the values are they're based on, how we learned about them. And so there's sort of this stereotype out there that religion is just really difficult to navigate. And I always like to sort of say, no, like come to our fair, or come hang out at the lounge where there's, you know, people hang out. Most of the time they're just students who study, get free coffee and heat up their lunch, and great conversations happen. And so to me, it's a real force of connection, where we share the who we are, and that includes religion. Shares a lot of food. We have endless discussions about food, of course, and then also, you know, culture, music, maybe, or you know, art, you know, like the way we live. You talked about architecture earlier, and so I just want to know if you sort of have some either stories of success where that narrative has really been able to be heard, that religion is a force, or else how do we tell that story more strongly?
Okay, let me start with the easier one about the religion.
I was going to ask
being
you
a force. You know what? It's You know, it's a good question. I've always been in spaces where religion is something that I'm consistently asked about. Probably because I'm so visibly, like it's so visibly clear what religion I am. And at the same time, I am so in your face as a character, but also a female. The three things that contradict each other in most people's minds when they think about Muslim and when they think about women. And I think that has allowed me really great conversations. I don't think I've ever been in a place where religion is not part of the conversation at some point ever.
Oh,
Like nobody comes and talks to me about music or about like the great albums of the 70s that I'm just like, come on, let's talk rock music. Most people want to talk to me about religion. And there's something in that. In the beginning I hated it. Like I used to dislike it very much because my approach was like, I am not just a walking poster for
Mhm.
progressive Muslim. Like that's just not me, and I don't believe in that. But I think I realized that it is because we live in a society in North America. It is again going back to the system of do not talk politics and do not talk
Mhm.
religion in a polite conversation. And I think that is, I've yet to trace where that started from, but I want to go 100%. That sounds like a colonial thing because that to me, I'm like, no immigrant would have thought that one up because that doesn't make any sense. So and I think it's a way to control people's influences or religious influences in the public sphere.
Mm.
On one hand, I understand the political reasoning behind that. On the other hand, I think that people have a fear of approaching things that are so, I mean, it's the thing that you hold on to the dearest and at the most minute level. It is very hard, doesn't matter how objective you are, it is very hard to discuss religion or get into a space of religion without getting very passionate and heated about it. Doesn't matter how removed you are or how, far away you want to stay from it. And I think that scares people, kind of like talking about people's emotions. People also don't talk about their emotions freely. And I think it freaks people out. What I find is that I just approach it like the beast that it is. It's an elephant in the room. It's always in the room, and I don't shy away from it. But I also come to conversation willing to learn. If I want to have a fight, I will go pick a fight with one of my siblings. It is not going to be about religion with somebody that I don't know. Is
Right.
basically my approach to it. And if I want to prove that my religion is right, it is 100%. I realized a long time ago, not going to come from conversations in which I stand on a pulpit trying to prove everyone else wrong. If you want to prove your religion is right, if you want to prove that you're a good human being, it is going to come through your actions. That's what people will always remember in conversation. They won't remember what sect you were, they won't remember much about your own religion, but they'll remember what kind of human being you were. And so that's kind of how I come to it as an individual.
Mhm.
As a society, I don't know. I mean, how do you I don't know. I've yet to find that. I think we're all trying to figure out.
Yeah, well, and I think
approach it.
I do have some thoughts about why is there such a separation. I think in part it's history, and the first settlers, i.e. European settlers, many of them came from a place where religion was an oppressive force. And I just want to say we don't want to be
Mhm.
like that. So that's just sort of a bit of a hunch I have. I vaguely remember something. And so they say, let's just separate that
Yeah,
and have religious freedom, but everybody can do their own thing.
yeah,
Um,
probably right.
anyway, that's more of an academic conversation, and I'm not sure if somebody can look it up. But I think, like sadly in Quebec in particular, we've seen examples of how not to do it, how not to engage, and that's based on fear, I believe. So we have a really horrible bill here, Bill 21, where people. People can't wear visibly religious symbol. And Brian, I know you have a class. Brian always has to leave at 2:45 for his class, so he just signed off. And so people, like if you wanted to be be a teacher in Quebec. You couldn't, because you were, you know, and people with kippas or people with turbans, and it's just, so that's one way in which for me not to do it, and this is utter fear, you know. And to me it is about the conversation. It's about sitting in our lounge and chatting and saying, oh, like it starts often with, oh, what would you like to try my lunch? Well, what's in it? Well, so there's it's with those easy, simple conversation that it often starts about who we are and what we believe. So
Yeah.
I'm a bit sidetracked because Osama just joined us, so welcome. Just we're the end of our conversation, not towards the end of our conversation with Angie. So we're just talking about how religious diversity can really be lived every day, and but nobody yet has found sort of that perfect answer, or the perfect way forward. I think like many things in life, it's also sort of one step at a time, and we make a lot of mistakes. I think people are also afraid of offending others, and so I'd rather sometimes people would rather not talk to others because of the fear of making mistake or saying something stupid, rather than asking questions from a place of curiosity.
I mean, I agree with you, but I think that I think this is kind of where, I mean, I also feel like it's such an individual thing. You can suss out the people who are being belligerent towards religious versus somebody who is like honestly trying to understand it, like with the with like the headscarf, the hijab that I wear. The amount of times that I get people thinking I'm a cancer patient and wanting to come talk to me about cancer on the subway is just ridiculous. And there are often part of me is like, if you really do think I'm a cancer patient, you probably shouldn't talk to me. You probably, like, I'm having a bad day. I definitely don't want to sit and discuss with you my like prognosis. But I know that a lot of those people who have asked me come from certain communities that aren't, part of the mainstream pop culture today. And so for them, they didn't grow up with women wearing hijabs. That was an unusual thing. That was an immigrant thing. That was like, we'll see it every decade or something. So there's like, I think an understanding that you need to come into a conversation. And then sometimes you just need to put your foot down and like, like for example, I think that Bill 21 in Quebec isn't just about religious oppression. There's deep racism in that. And sometimes it's kind of like, there's no talking through that. Racists just needs to be like shut down. How that's going to happen is I have no solutions. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. So like in a lot of the work that I do, just because there's so much, sadness in it, in the world, and how people treat each other, I often try to approach it from, the end, the side that, yeah, okay, there are horrible government things, there are a lot of racists, but then when there is something very traumatic that happens to a community, often it is the religion that moves first. It is the religious, houses that open their doors and say, come in, like regardless of who you are, where you come from. There's the community in that sense. And in many ways, it's the religious communities that play fundamental roles in society when it comes to protecting the poor, feeding the poor, giving space to those who are not as wealthy or well off as other people. So there's a lot of positivity in that. I kind of try to focus on that, more than I do on the racist, because really, I don't know, they're just everywhere.
Right. That's a whole other, I don't want to shut that down because I do think it's an important conversation. But I like, it seems like a bit of another conversation cafe actually. But Sai, you turned on your camera again. Would you like, is that your way of saying I'd like to say something?
Yeah, actually, no. I realize it's like a tangent to what we're kind of talking about.
Go for it.
But yeah, the thing about religion, I over these like last few years, I've really like thought about the utility of religion in a sense. How like we did talk about the negativity and the positivity, right? There are negative stuff and there are positive stuff, but always when we talk about the positive stuff of faith or religion as such, or the religious communities, I find the conversation always leads to like basic things like what you just said, that you know they help the poor. Religious houses are the ones who open their doors to the downtrodden or the underprivileged. But I see that as something basically human, right? It's just basic kindness, and I find that across all religions, that whenever the discussion comes about the positive aspects, it's about this, like being kind. So I really I'm doubtful about the utility of religion here, because if there was no religion, let's say there was faith is not being followed strictly, then a lot of negative aspects would disappear, I feel. So how do you what do you think about that? Um,
Oh, wow, Sai, big
it's
question, big question.
yeah, I realize that it's just
Love it, Sai.
Okay, I mean, listen, I'm gonna like let's be like really honest about it. Religion doesn't necessarily make you a better person. It may give you a value system to have to live up to, but it doesn't necessarily, make for good people, because there are bad people who follow religion all the time, you know?
yeah, yeah.
I think that what it does in terms of like the kindness and whatever, like I'm going to be very honest on a personal level. I am not always a nice person. Sometimes I find it very challenging to be very nice. Sometimes it's hard to get the courage to do the right thing, um, when you know that it is up to you to do the right thing. Sometimes I want to be the coward. I don't want to do the right thing. I don't care. I just want to like, do my own thing. For me personally, religion challenges that because it allows me to constantly imagine in my head there is somebody else greater than me watching me. And it forces me to do the right thing. That's not necessarily because I'm a good person. That just because there's a fear aspect that I do want to do a better thing, and there is something like that to be held accountable to. If you take out religion, will people be necessarily be good? I mean, I don't
I
think
mean,
so. You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like, I think people are going to be good or bad regardless of whether they're religious or not religious. I think that for a lot of people in the world, religion is a sense of comfort in the chaos of life. You constantly have to live this world not knowing what is going to happen to you every single day. And sometimes really bad things happen to you. People lose their homes, people have family members in hospitals, people have like anxiety and fear. For a lot of people, religion might be that comfort space to hold on to and say, okay, there's something else out there that I can believe in that allows me enough courage to just get through this moment or this day or this hour. For other people, religion is about, some kind of growth, like aiming for something higher, being a better person. For me, I'm one of those people who really likes to believe in the sense of religion to do better in the world, because I don't think it's enough that I just be a good person living. But that's me. For other people, it's like a sense of power and authority, and those are a lot of dictators. And I don't think they're very religious people. I think they're horribly horrible people. But what I'm
yeah,
saying
especially
is,
the
like,
fundamentalism. Yeah, that's one aspect which uh, I don't know. Religion takes it to the extreme, I feel. If there was no religion, I don't think. I mean, obviously, people won't kill in the name of religion, because if there was no religion, that's one thing, and that's a whole lot of crimes, I think. But yeah, I see what you mean when you said that people are not necessarily good always. So the moral compass might not be enough. And maybe if there's a religious angle to it, a bit of a fear of accountability, that might make them act in a way you're supposed to act, probably. But
But I would
yeah,
also say that people act, listen, I think at the end of the day, the good and the good and bad inside of each of us is, there is a very individual choice to it. So even if you take out religion, if you have money on the table, put $10 on the table and see how many honest people are gonna not touch that $10 or try to take it. You know what I mean? There's always these like interesting social experiments. And I
Mm.
think that doesn't have to do necessarily with the presence or lack of religion. I think it has to do with the individual. What is the
Mm.
individual aiming for in life? So the fundamentalists, the dictators, they clearly are aiming for power, because I don't
Mm.
think that religion is the driving force behind the decisions they're making. I think it's the idea of power, you know. But that's a whole other like tangent discussion. I just
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to say
yeah.
that people are going to be good or bad whether religion exists or not. I think religion just helps a lot of people navigate the chaos and the questions in life, just like books do it for some people, music does it for some people, travel does it for others. You know, everybody needs their thing in this world to feel like they can live this world and it's going to be okay.
Mm.
I would echo that. And for me, being religious means, I mean, I think I could be whatever, good or bad or in between. I think there's more than just good or bad. It's a spectrum. But it helps me in big questions of life. There's a community that I trust and that I feel connected to, and that has that struggles with questions. So like questions of, you know, what are the questions of the day? How do we deal with COVID? That's maybe more a question for scientists, but you know, how do we deal with social issues, homelessness, poverty, you know, even economic questions, basic guaranteed basic income. You know, those are questions that move me every day. And so there's a group of people that I trust, that I've learned to get to know, learn to know as deep thinkers, who sort of come from some of the same and also some different perspectives that help me think things through. And so that's what's important for me. That doesn't mean I can't, you know, and sometimes those alliances, like a think tank of, or a group of people who address you know, housing in Montreal. You know, those are not all people from my faith, but they're people that I've learned to trust in that community, that I don't have to think it through for myself because it's just too big a topic, you know. And so there's that. It's that community, and then also the accountability, you know. And I'll give you a very good example, like the recent situation with the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia, you know. And I sort of like, oh my gosh, there's so many stories. Of course, the story that our textbooks have told us is that, you know, the Mi'kmaq should fish just like everybody else, and that's not right. And then I also hear stories of recent rulings and so on. And there was so much information, and I go like, I don't even know what to think. And so I read up on with some of the resources and the stories that people I trust, both from my faith community, but also people I trust from outside, from no faith, or from, you know, who sort of have thought this through and have helped me figure this out and see how, you know, what I believe, how I can support Mi'kmaq fishers or the situation, and how, what the larger issue too is in society. So that's one example where and I would say my faith community has helped me together with a larger community. And then it's also, that's one part, and then it's also accountability. So, you know, like if I'm individual and try to do good, that's great. And I might do good in a way that I think, but every so often my faith community says, no, this is the right thing to do here in, you know, again, in this, or in terms of the anti-racism work we need to do here. Here's where we're going. So my faith community, for example, has really pushed me to, in a way, in language that I understand, to address my white privilege, for example. So for me, and again, that's personal, this is how I get it. Now others get that same accountability and community wisdom from other groups, but to me it's there. And I think also those stories, again, it's about narrative. Whose narrative are we listening? Are we listening to the narrative that religion does a lot of damage, which that narrative is out there, and that's, I think there's a lot of truth to it, but there's also the narrative that religious people and religious groups work very hard, just like other groups, in other interest groups or community groups, to really address the issues that move us in 2020. So, Osama, I don't know if you had your microphone off earlier, if you want to say, add to this discussion. And I'm also aware of it's 3 o'clock, so
Yeah, I would like. I didn't participate from the beginning. So from what I grasped, I missed even some parts when I after I joined. But finally, what I feel is from my religion, from my faith, what I believe in is the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet. And they all, even in the Quran, God is speaking to us, and the Quran is telling us to go and to meet other people, and he created us in different families and tribes to go and meet them, and to know that the best of us is the closest people to God. And your religion should be the driving force to you to try and get closer to the other people, and try to lay down bridges, try uh, to get people into building communities on being good to your neighbors. Even like the Prophet Muhammad, he had a Jewish neighbor. He used to throw his garbage in front of the Prophet's place all the time, and then one day there is no garbage in front of the Prophet's door, so he went to the guy and asked about him. He was sick. So this teaches me that even no matter if you're Jew, if you're Christian, if you're Hindu, no matter what is your religion, I should be kind to you as a human first and foremost. And then the Islam, the Quran, God is always talking to us to to go and speak with the different religious people, to come and to do something, with all respect. I would respect your religion, but we just want to get the idea of what is your basis of your religion. Why do you believe what you believe? Why I do believe what I believe? So we can get in a better understanding of the other person's religious or background. Like God says in the Quran, قُلْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا. Like, all people, all humanity, come to one word, that we only worship one God. And this coming to one word, to one God, this won't happen unless we talk, unless we express, and this all, even in the Quran, God says, do not curse our different people's religion or idols, or even I believe it is not true. I'm not allowed, I'm forbidden by God to say any bad word about any people's religion, because they might curse my God. So it is the same. Okay, even I believe that Islam is the right religion or whatever, I'm not allowed, I'm forbidden by God to go and say any bad word about any one's else true religion in his perspective. But I'm only encouraged to go and speak, to understand them, try to convey our message, try to be a good representative of the Islam, try to be a good Muslim, in the sense of, as the Prophet was the one who went and asked about the guy who was throwing the garbage in front of his house. I'm also asked to go and to make sure that my neighbors are not in need, that the poor I'm helping. I have to give charity every year, 2.5% of my overall wealth. So it is all in the sense of uh, bringing people together, coming to an understanding, trying to understand each other's religion and background, and try to understand what is the best way of us in overall on how to deal with each other.
Thanks, Osama. And I think that's what we try to do in cafes like this, at the MFSC, at the fairs, is to actually talk to one another and to learn from one another, and then ultimately really ask, what is it I believe, and also how does my belief then affect others, and how do I show that to others? I think that's certainly my goal as someone, as a human being, and as a person working in the MFSC. And sometimes I do well and sometimes not so well, and most of the time I just sort of stumble through. So Hirsch, I'm wondering if you have anything. You've been very quiet and listening, I take it. I'm just wondering if you have anything to add, or as we're about to close.
It's been an interesting session. I mean, I mostly prefer to listen than to speak.
That's perfectly all right. And you don't have to say much. Yeah.
It was certainly very interesting. I mean, some of the things brought up are things I can relate to. Some of them less so, and it's interesting to see other people's perspectives.
Right, and I think that's what this is about. And I think Concordia is a great place where, like, it often astounds me how we're in the middle of a major urban center, and yet it's so easy to be very insular, only hang out with my friends, my culture, the people who like what I like, and here we are sitting in classes or even on Zoom next to people whose experience is quite different or varied in some way. And so here is a wonderful opportunity to engage in that and really ask not just what's on the next test, but also how do we navigate this wonderfully diverse and complex life. So I think we're nearing the end of our time, but we usually just sort of do one little round of what do you take with you, like one word that stuck with you. And so I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that. I think for me, that's just that notion of this, I grew up with this very staunch separation of church and state. And just sort of, I guess I gained a new insight for that and the implications for that for many.
So I would say maybe like one word maybe to think about before we end this meeting that I came late for, and I'm sorry for this. Next time I'd be on time. But honestly, like I would like suggest and like encourage myself even to read more and to unite better than divert or to go like strays or different paths. We just need to come closer, I believe.
Thanks, Osama. Sai or Hirsch or Angie?
I feel like I've spoken a lot today, so I'm kind of trying to hold myself back. I mean, I did really like the discussion, and I think Sai has proposed some interesting questions, and totally valid questions. And I think questions that a lot of people, whether on the religious side of the spectrum or on the not religious side of the spectrum, often ask, especially when you see all the stuff going on in the world, so I definitely want to thank you for that, and for like getting to that, to those kind of questions, Sai. Mm-hmm. I don't know what I've taken away. I don't know, I'm kind of all over the place, but mind you, also I was also working on a couple of projects that deal with a lot of these, and I think that sometimes I feel like sometimes like I like to not have an opinion and more be the one who asks and listens, especially when I'm unsure of what to think.
Yeah, it's really tough for me to come to any conclusion whatsoever. And I love the discussion, and And the thing is, like, where else can you have these kind of conversations except like these events? And that's why I'm I'm really lucky to have this kind of experience here. Takeaway, I really love the discussion. I think that's it's pretty much and it really opened up a lot of like thinking avenues for thinking, food for thought.
Great, and maybe that's a great place to end. And also, so thank you, Angie, for venturing out into this, responding to some email from a woman you had no idea who she was, and visiting, joining us today remotely. It will be posted on the website from the fair. So hopefully others will have the benefit of engaging those questions. And I'm always glad when we ask difficult questions, because so often those conversations go like, we're all alike, whether you read the Quran or the Torah or the Bhagavad Gita or something. It's all, and yes, there's many commonalities, but we need to ask those, dig a bit deeper and ask those difficult questions. So today we raised some of them, and I think I'm certainly richer for that. So, and we never solve anything in those conversations. It's just food for thought. We move on, and maybe in a week or so I go like, oh, maybe I should think on that some more. So thank you very much for coming today and being part of this conversation.